Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Stay on Top of Your Competition by Building a Successful Market Response Program. My name is Rena. It's so nice to see you all here, and thank you for joining us today. And just a reminder to ask questions of the speakers, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar. And this webinar is also recorded and available for replay shortly after today's event. And you can view it from our website, www.competitivemarketingsummit.com. And I will now turn this over to our speakers, Ben Shearer and Lisa Perry.
Great. Thank you, Rena. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Hey, Ben. How are you?
Great. Thanks. So for those who do not know us, I am actually the co-founder of the Competitive Marketing Summit, as well as working in the industry for Red Hat. Lisa?
Yes, I've been doing product marketing, competitive marketing, and competitive analysis, market analysis for a really long time, and have worked with Ben at several organizations, and it's really fun to be doing the Competitive Marketing Summit again.
Yeah, that is exciting. So as we kind of come out of back to kind of in-person events, we're trying to figure out when we can actually all to get back together after our last event in 2019. So let me cover the agenda a little bit. This is going to be a great format because Lisa and I are really just kind of going to, throw around and do some discussion around market response. There is really kind of some pretty clear definitions, or at least positions that analysts and other consulting firms have come up with, maybe even within your own organizations, of what market response is, what it means, what a program is. We're going to kind of cover some of those concepts and share kind of experiences that we've had going through this. We're going to understand, how to identify, prioritize, even create a market response plan. Ultimately being battle ready by having that market response plan in place. And again, what that looks like. So you ready to go, Lisa?
Absolutely, Ben.
All right, fantastic. So let's begin with the scenario. So while competitive marketing and competitive intelligence are tasked with monitoring, analyzing, and disseminating competitive positioning, there are really fundamental risks and opportunity when faced with unpredictable market events. And I think that's a key statement there, right? It's something you can't predict, something that a competitor has thrown at you, and you as a competitive professional have to respond to and figure out what type of response is necessary. All right. So let me go ahead and shoot out a poll here real quick. What is your experience with market response? So let me go ahead and start this poll. And here we go. We'll give it about 30 seconds. So really, this is experience across the board, right? And maybe you might not even know you participate in market response until the end of this presentation. All right, we see some. I've seen it done at my organization. I've led the effort. And all right, I'm going to give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll go ahead and end it. Yeah, so like I just mentioned, that's we've had people that have seen it, experienced it maybe, and had also led the effort. So good, there is some good experience here. Hopefully we can continue that with helping you understand what this is more in detail and share some of our experience around it. So first and foremost, it's around the event, right? So the event that occurred in the market, and we kind of call that a trigger event in market response. So really, what event occurred? So how did it occur? Was it a news flash? Was it a PR move? Was it an acquisition? We'll kind of go through some of what those events are in the next slide. but to kind of think of how many, like what events have you had to react to maybe in the last 12 months? I can think of personally an acquisition, for example. Lisa, maybe something that you've had to deal with.
One of the things I find interesting is when the salespeople come to me and say, we're hearing this, that the competition is saying this about us. We need to respond to that because we either lost the deal or it's created doubt and increased this sales cycle.
Yeah. Great example. And that could have been spurred by some type of, announcement or something that a customer is led to believe, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. It could be announcement. It could just be a deal that was lost, and then you look and you find that there's an article that they've written. Everybody uses FUD, but that may be a little bit more immediate than some of the others.
Fantastic. So, when you look at an event or, when it happened, how it happened, where it happened, then you kind of look at the competitive nature of the event to your business, right? So is it really business critical? I mean, is this competitor or competitive event or trigger really aimed squarely at the core of what your business is, right? This competitor is going head to head. They have a product service, whatever directed directly at what you as a company produce. So that would be business critical, right? Is it a medium critical event, right? Does it maybe in kind of your example, Lisa, is it something business critical, or is it something that we just have to maybe enable our salespeople to say, hey, this could be coming, get ready. Here's some assets to kind of to guide them, give them some positioning. I like the winter is coming, right? So be prepared for the storm or the winter. Or is it low? Maybe just some internal awareness and communications, but not highly critical. It's not something that you have something kind of in your back pocket ready to go. And this can kind of align with your communication plan, especially in CI and competitive marketing, right? So you should have some type of communication and prioritize it accordingly. So here we go. What is and what constitutes a competitive event or trigger, right? And Lisa and I came up with a bunch of these, right? A product announcement, trigger, new patent or new technology, industry recognition, a new startup. I think we exhausted this list, right, Lisa?
But we did, but they are all different. They all require kind of slightly different response and a different tone, and a different way to reposition your own organization or your own technologies.
Yeah, great. And you can kind of see it, where maybe each one of those would impact some type of guidance or response in your own organization. And again, there is no right answer in this because every organization is unique and every organization set up differently and has a different culture. So this is something that as professionals, we need to kind of adapt and look at maybe what best practices are to developing a competitive response program. So how do you determine the threat? So this is where, we kind of look at the first step in really building a market response program where you kind of build a cross-functional team. And we'll talk a little bit about where this kind of fits in, but it really needs to understand the threat and to also get buy-in, to get support to move this into a market response. You definitely need kind of a cross-functional team or a market response committee, so to speak. And it has to be represented across disciplines, everything from your management to senior management to your marketing, maybe anyone from brand to, and in my experience, we work very closely with demand generation. So they're the ones that get that word out there through, various means. Definitely with your product teams, right? You want to hear their input and understand how that impacts their product roles and responsibilities. Sales leadership, I mean, that's a big one. Obviously, Lisa brought that up as well because sales needs to have guidance. Also, analyst relationships, press relationships, communications, and ultimately legal. What can you say and not get in trouble for it?
And I've found that legal often gives really great guidance. They're fantastic partners in how we approach the competition, how we approach any response by the team. The other thing that sales and sales leadership do is they can kind of validate that threat. They're not really the type to say the chicken, the sky is falling all the time, and they're not Chicken Little at all. They're saying a lot of times we've had sales leadership come back and say, you know what, we can work around this in a different way. Let's take this approach because I think it'll resonate with the field. And so those things are very, very good. And having this whole team really helps with level setting, and you get this really diverse point of view on what competition is and what the threat is and what the risk is to the organization. And the decisions that come out of that with this diverse team really tend to just be a lot better.
Yeah. And I would even say that kind of in my experience, we have not, this hasn't really been kind of a team or a group that had been predefined, right? It just kind of, and a lot, if it's a big trigger, right? If it's a direct threat and the whole company's mobilized, like these stakeholders just tend to gravitate and that just has to work out. Again, when we talk about a plan and a market response plan, it's always kind of better to have those roles identified so you can do things maybe a little quicker, right? So
tends to be less reactive and more strategic as well.
Yeah, that is the key. That is the key. Also, external resources is really important. These tend to not be as quick. So, but you can probably, if it's a big enough, if you're a high exposure company or high exposure in your market, you're going to get some PR. You're going to get some maybe industry analyst write-ups. I tend to if it's really important, our field needs to have guidance. We do something very quickly, but then add on to the communications and the guidance as to what the external communities are saying and the guidance they're giving. So that's definitely something to be included and also understand that as you kind of build out this plan.
And Ben, one of the other groups of people that we can discuss and we can reach out to are our customer advisory board. So those champions, those customer champions who are really supportive of our organization or the technology or the direction of the organization, really great to get their input as well as some of those strategic partners.
And I think I have something later in that talks about some of those kind of research methods to test. I think so. So what are some of the qualifiers? So obviously does the market event demand urgency? Do your customers and pundits demand a response? Right. So this is something it's like if it's silent, does it hurt you more than having a response? So something is demanded, right? Or else you will not look good. Does sales need sales asking, like we continue to say, right? Do they need guidance? They need to be equipped with a response. And does management obviously require a strategy to overcome this competitor or this competitive threat? And those are all kind of qualifiers for having something in place. And they also, again, they don't have to stand on their own as part of a response program, but it's something maybe part of your overall kind of CI strategy as well, or your competitive marketing strategy within your organization. So I took a stab at, or Lisa and I took a stab at kind of just honing in on what a market response really is. And we came up with a couple kind of discussion points, I want to call them. I'm not going to say this is an official definition because everyone's going to kind of probably form this and shape it into something that best fits their own situation and organization. But we look at it kind of like as a company cross-functional awareness program established to quickly react to a competitive trigger. The formation of a battle-ready plan that includes the components of communication, campaign/awareness, with the appropriate budgets allocated and predefined processes designed to counter the trigger event. So I kind of chuckle at the appropriate budgets, right? Because I think we are all in the situation where we're kind of budgeting and allocating budgets to something that may or may not even happen, and we don't know when it's going to happen. Could be a pretty big obstacle.
Yes, and I think that and those budgets may not live in one organization either, or in one silo, and sometimes you have to do a little bit of creative fundraising in order to respond.
Yep, and that's exactly it. Be creative. So here I wanted to talk about a few objectives of market response, and Lisa and I talked about this the other day. I thought this was really cool because there's definitely, and you guys have all seen this in your own industries, right? What type of response, what type of tone is warranted? Typically, in my experience, I've always worked for companies that we don't typically go head to head with our competitors. We kind of take the high road approach, right? So if a competitor goes at us, we'll maybe have an awareness campaign that shows specific differentiators that we know that the attacking competitor does not have, right? Some advantages that we have in our business that they don't. Kind of, your audience may know you are going against them, but you're not, calling them out by name, and you're just kind of calling their bluff too if they're going head to head and making notice of maybe chinks in your own armor. So, typically I've had experience more with the high road approach. Obviously there's head to head, right? So there's maybe two competitors competing against the same technology. So they might not be going directly at you, but they're going directly at the same market share, so to speak. And we added that last one. Lisa, remember our conversation around the social media? I thought it was pretty interesting what you had to say.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, you can put together a program, you can have agreement, you can have policy within an organization, and then you get some people within the organization that respond directly to some competitive FUD, and it tends to kind of go down to the lowest common denominator, and that's usually when the attorneys get involved. But they make a little phone call, but I think that there's aspects that you can prepare for, understanding that you can't control every human activity and every spokesperson that you have for your organization, and that's okay. We are all humans, and we all feel very passionate about some of our technologies, markets, customers, and jobs, and but have that as sort of a guiding policy within this market response program, so that you have more predictability in what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Great. And exactly right. The social media, as in all aspects of our lives, can go down a road that maybe isn't good for anybody. So that's something to definitely keep an eye on. And obviously there's a lot of good kind of tools and social listening type programs to help you kind of keep your ear to the ground on that one. Some other kind of suggestions as, simply, clarify or reestablish your position. Maybe just the position all along of your service or product has been the differentiator. So just kind of saying, hey, yeah, great, this product's out here, but, we're still market leader. We're still, have more customers than anyone, whatever that means. And then, maybe present new information or positioning that may have come out of what your market response group, right? So it might be like, okay, they're attacking us here, but guess what? We just, we just announced these new features that will basically leapfrog those gaps. So that's an opportunity maybe to, work with your brand awareness or your global demand to put out some paid search or put out some new assets that might convertible assets that might have kind of a new or fresh look at messaging and maybe even tuned toward that competitor in some way, shape, or form. And then ultimately, stay relevant, right? This is stay in front of your audience, stay with fresh content, with fresh messaging. And that's just, a practice that should occur naturally. But again, this can be something that's developed as a competitive tool as well.
One of the things, Ben, I think we can also say is this, especially this stay relevant, is becoming more and more important with positioning, with market positioning. One of the reasons for that is the way the technology is evolving, and that your solutions that may have reached a certain user or a certain buyer in the past are usually now expanding cross silos. We have more people that we're trying to reach. We're having more people that we're trying to that we provide, AI or reporting and analytics and any of those visible metrics that we're sharing across an organization. And so staying relevant really does require not a reactive approach per competitor, but understanding that your competitors have also grown, and then that strong clarifying, reestablishing position can help customers and users understand your position in the market and your strategy with the objective of getting people to stay with you or come with you on that journey.
Yep. Great point. Thank you. All right. So this is kind of more of maybe a global demand type approach, but I kind of grabbed this from a practice we built, and it's really around kind of the awareness point, and it's really kind of getting what we want to do is get in front of the triggers. So when a trigger happens, we're kind of ready to mobilize quickly. And I looked at this kind of through two lenses, right? So the competitive response would be, basically focusing on a single identified competitor. We already know who that is with a core program or campaign. We would build kind of baseline, we call them digital kits, right? So this is assets that can be disseminated down through the different geographies and areas that your product or service supports, and including kind of thought leadership, so blogs, right? So you can respond very quickly with a blog and a thought leadership piece, ultimately maybe a webcast down the road, and obviously customer-facing messaging. And then ultimately, field enablement, right? So this all takes time to develop, fund, and execute, but that's something that probably most of us do in some type of competitive response. Now we look at monitor or market response. Here we're looking for kind of what more like monitoring the market and kind of having a pool of competitors looking for kind of what these predefined triggers look like, right? Is it something that is something aimed directly towards your company, looking to kind of cut off the, what a leading product is or somewhere we hope to get or a shared market, that type of thing. And then we kind of have these monitors in place to notify the market response council when a market response event takes place. And then, then the council can activate, right? This is where we look to triage the event. And then we can look at what level of response is required. Is this simply something that we enable internally, or do we go full out and actually build a campaign against this competitor, a full-scale campaign, which of course takes time and money to do, but should be obviously part of the plan. And then we should look back and amend and update baseline contents to address the trigger itself.
And Ben, one of the communications that I've seen be incredibly effective in technology organizations is kind of a one-page response doc right when it happens. So the what happened, who, why, where, when,
Yeah.
that you identified up front, creating that kind of the internal response with the, the follow-on that we will post more things wherever the sales portal is or at some other communications portal within the organization. But to send that around an email, I have felt is timely. Linking to it in any internal newsletters, things like that, and then building off of that. So a lot of times people need something now just to understand that the team is aware and thinking about this, either competitive response or market response, and doing that evaluation and risk mitigation. So those are things also that you can kind of get ahead of on the communications and product side.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and that makes good sense. So that kind of leads in. Good lead in, Lisa. There we go. Number one, components of market response. First and foremost, communications. So this will help you also get feedback, right? So as you build your communications and guidance, hopefully the field will come back, or your constituents will come back and say, yeah, this is really a big deal. We need to maybe ratchet it up a cent. So that this kind of then allows you to build your impact analysis, really what kind of impact does it have on your business, the future of your business, your strategy. It also allows you to kind of look at and build a bill of materials, right? What kind of content do you have? And this is great. This is something I've learned as well, is that the companies I've worked for and when I'm working with kind of corporate marketing and global demand, they always have a very good kind of library of content. What's still very relevant, what are the key themes of each, what's some content that we could repurpose. And so instead of having to write a new white paper or do a checklist or some type of asset, we can actually maybe modify it that it can be used then for a competitive response program. And that would just maybe take a week instead of months to accomplish. What do we do short term? What do we do long term? So again, where do the buckets fit in there? What type of enablement is required? Again, initial communication to full scale, how to have that conversation about the competitor with your customer, so to speak. And then of course, what type of awareness, what does the campaign components look like? How do we mobilize? And there's more. I mean, did I miss anything, Lisa?
It really depends. So sometimes it also impacts, in a public company, it's going to impact things a little bit differently. So what kinds of, it could be a campaign, it could just be a notification to customers. It just really, really depends. It could be a support response because people will call in. And I think we're going to talk about that in a second anyway.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's the bomb can't be understated here, and how important it is to really identify which assets, what assets, how, when, and where those things will be completed. People have expectations, and in order to reduce the fear that people have with a very strong competitive attack, it's good to give them the things that they're going to need to build that confidence and to be able to continue having these conversations.
Point. All right. So ultimately, when you implement a program like this, and perhaps it is activated through a trigger, how do you begin measuring, and how do you measure success? So if it's a market response that maybe turns into something longer, like maybe a market response could last year or longer, or a couple of years. Depending on the nature of the threat. So things that I look at is share of voice, sentiment, and Lisa, we talked about there's a little bit of a caveat there, right? That you should look out for.
Yeah, I think with share of voice, sometimes we have to understand that sometimes it's very subjective, that we are naming those competitors against who we are benchmarking. It doesn't mean that's the entire market that we should be measuring against. So, just use it as a data point and not the strategic driver.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the next bullet too is around marketing stats. So as you kind of start to run some of these programs and campaigns, if you see a high volume of page hits or conversions on assets that are competitive related, that would kind of tell you you're kind of hitting the sweet spot, right? And if you're not, maybe the event wasn't as urgent as you thought internally. So a lot of times you're kind of working in that bubble. You kind of hear what kind of PR and pundits want you to hear, but in reality, maybe it wasn't as bad, or vice versa, right? You're not hearing it externally, but your customers are reacting to a competitive threat that you may not have identified to its fullest extent. Also taking advantage of surveys, customer advisory boards or customer advisory councils. That, obviously listening to your customer is huge, right? We all do that, and that's where we get most of our feedback. So having and participating in those as a competitive marketer is an understatement of how critical that is. Reaching out to your analysts community, obviously that's their job to provide you with that kind of feedback and kind of direction and insight. Win-loss programs, I think, we hear this over and over again in kind of competitive marketing. This is so valuable, this analysis, to be able to hear from customers directly why your product either won or lost in competitive or in an opportunity. Also sales confidence. How confident are they in spreading the competitive message, having conversations with the customers when the targeted competitor is involved, and ultimately looking at kind of what net promoter type instruments or measurements you may have in your organization. This can go all over the place, but we kind of look at, obviously, in my industry, we look at how well do we support service and support actually provide or make our customers happy, right?
One other thing to kind of go with sales confidence and net promoter score, one of the things we can also measure, in addition to the likelihood to recommend, is the likelihood to renew, because we may have some install-based customers who very much liked the product, thought it was good over the competition, but because they have new needs, they may not be renewing, even though they are happy to be a reference. So really, really good to understand those two trends as well, with regards to the competition and with regards to a market or even a competitive response.
Perfect. All right, this is the fun part, right? Where are some tools and processes that we could incorporate into both maybe understanding the threats, but also understanding the effectiveness in our response? So surveys, if you guys don't do something at least once a year to kind of gauge the temperature in the field of what the competitive, where their competitive pressures are, that's obviously telling, and it's something that it's always been part of my practice while doing kind of competitive intelligence and competitive marketing. Competitive intelligence monitoring, whether you're using a full-fledged tool or using Google Alerts, I recommend really kind of formalizing that, right? And there's just so many really good tools and services on the market. Look at what best fits your organization's needs, and really, Google Alerts are great, but there's a lot of noise if you don't kind of manage those properly, and there's some great tools on the market that can help you really get the insights you need. My group actually is part of the group I'm in right now is part of kind of the business insight. So we really provide a lot of research instruments that go even beyond competitive, but these are great vehicles to get maybe kind of who your personas, your competitive buying personas are, maybe getting deeper into the minds of what motivates your targeted buying personas, and how maybe a competitor influences them. And of course, primary research, right? Look at, this is something we use all the time. So it's, areas that we can't do as an internal business where you can hire maybe a firm to help you do some of this research, maybe pricing and packaging, maybe some persona, buying persona, maybe even reach out into different verticals and or even go to market outlets, partners based, direct sales, obviously digital sales, that type of thing. Sales repository, I think we all kind of deal with that in a way. Where do you keep this information? How do you track it? What's being used? And I mentioned social listening earlier. I've been really playing around with that a lot lately, and I call this competitive social listening. So this might be a future podcast, blog, or even a webinar, but there's some great tools that you can really tune in to hear what's happening, and especially in your competitor space, and measure that against where you want to be. And again, back to what Lisa said of that caveat, it's kind of, you may be measuring against what the vendor is actually controlling, but again, it still gives you some insights. Then of course, overall communication. So you hear me say communications, and that's probably the most key element in your toolbox. All right, I think we kind of talked about this earlier, and this is any type of response has to have buy-in across these areas. And I think this is something that is, as you build your competitive response council, this is where you need representation. So something, kind of your next step is you kind of recognize who might be a good fit in each one of these roles. And even if they don't know it, maybe this is something as you start to build out your own program, it might be kind of maybe only you know about it, but you kind of build your own kind of response plan as to if something happens. This is what I do to at least kind of get the wheels moving a little bit.
Yeah, I think, Ben, one of the things I really want to say is do include support for your install base. Oftentimes, they're the first ones who get the call, the email, the chat that says, "Hey, I've heard about this thing. What does that mean for me?" And I think that really arming them and just understanding around the customer life cycle, all of those different touch points, making sure that they have the information they need and a single message back to the customer really goes a long way. So as Ben was talking about earlier, that communication, it is really what drives all of this. We need to have that communication, that strategy or the tactic, the direction, repeated and simplified over and over again for all those different stakeholders. And they will all participate. And I think, we can talk about maturity in a little bit, but I think that do it informally, but structure it, right? Structure it, even if you can't get buy-in at the upper echelons and get funding, if you even at least just do it with the context that your comms people, your PR people, all the people that are on your extended team. And work together, it just goes so much more smoothly and really meets the objectives of the response.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, great point. I think, it kind of goes into lessons learned. So, when you start to pull these people in, this is a program that will be ever evolving, right? And I think this is really critical, like I mentioned earlier, having kind of a battle ready plan. This is something you have in your back pocket, or even after this webcast, you go and kind of build like, okay, what does the flow chart look like? Who would I have to get involved? And at least have it in your mind how you can kind of programatize this. So having the plan ready, what it looks like to have a kind of a defensive posture, and being able to position against a threat quickly, agile, testing your agility, right? How you can do these on maybe a smaller basis, but maybe this is something you already know in your organization, like, oh, to get budget funded or to get new tools onboarded, it might be a huge commitment of time and effort. But in other cases, understand how things can get done, obviously, and that's part of just working in companies. But in this respect, having that process mapped. When perhaps something happened, why were you caught off guard, right? Maybe, a competitor snuck in there and maybe that was something that you should have seen coming, or we should have seen coming. We've always been caught off guard, or maybe it's just out of the blue, right? This wasn't something we knew, but understanding maybe how you could be better prepared. Organizational obstacles, I mean, we can go on forever for that, but like I mentioned earlier, budgets, allocating budgets, there's definitely different cultures and personalities, getting the right people involved, and earmarked, and maybe that type of communication has to happen up front. Maybe you initiate something and start to communicate it around to anticipate any obstacles. And, how long should it take? Weeks, months, quarters, years?
Or Ben, should it take any time at all? So sometimes when we're caught off guard at somebody that is making a big announcement, and we don't respond, and our response is an agreement amongst the team members, the program members, that we're really not going to respond publicly at this time, that we don't feel it really affects or impacts our strategy or our customer base. And we've done that risk analysis on that.
It's funny. We had one of our competitors has, like many companies in high tech, has a big conference, and we would anticipate what those announcements might be. Right. And, kind of have some talks like, okay, we think we're going to, it's almost like, those predictions you hear every year, this is what we're going to predict for technology. And so we kind of like, if we can get 3 out of 5, we're pretty good, but at least that's kind of fun,
Yes.
Fun group chatter. Right. And get you thinking. It's like, okay, yeah. In the news, we kind of saw them mentioning a few things, and maybe and that's where like social listening comes in. Maybe they'll let a few things slip where it's like, I got a feeling they might mention something around this in their upcoming conference. That way you can be prepared perhaps to enable your salespeople, or even perhaps look for those triggers as a market response.
And I think one of the things also, Ben, is we've seen this work really different ways in organizations. While in the larger companies, there's a competitive team, and in others there are not. But I think the lessons learned are really to ensure that everybody is thinking competitively, thinking about market position, and being confident in that. When the whole organization says that one group or one team needs to be the only competitive positioning, I think that these efforts fail. Whereas if you're socializing this information throughout the organization all the time to impact business outcomes, I think is very, very important.
Great. So this is kind of a eye chart a little bit, but here's some things to consider. And again, we'll share this deck out to all those who attended and have it posted up on our website as well. But identify your current process. Is 90 less or greater than 90 days really a market response, or is it just you're revamping your program? So really, what defines a market response? Something that you can as a company mobilize in 30 or 60 days. Try to build a map. What do you already have in place? Where are the gaps? Build a campaign plan with elements and budget. Obviously working probably with more your corporate marketing team to make that happen, but you should be, as a competitive marketer, be joined at the hip with your corporate marketing team. Identify any gaps. What would it take? and then, identify your market response council, which we talked about earlier. And these are, come up with like a proposal, come up with how you as the competitive expert will actually market or monitor the market, and who's responsible for what. So, as a trigger happens, what's the process of initiating or activating the council, and then defining what those qualified triggers look like, and what the criteria is to actually triage, and is there kind of a service level of agreement that you'll put in place to react. So these are actually some really good points, because I think in my experience, we really hasn't been a lot of structure put around this. And this is something new, maybe even a little bit career defining, if that it can be done quickly. Mostly what I've seen in real successful market responses is companies that can be agile, be able to open up budget quickly, right? So do some type of ad campaign or some type of campaign, and any campaign is associated with budget, right? So if you can work around that obstacle and have your kind of creative minds in the council all together, that will work definitely to your benefit. And then I just kind of drew up a quick kind of what a timeline might look like, right? So everything from creating building your council, building the framework, assigning resources in the plan, kind of document and test the process. So this can be like a circle. This can go on forever, right? Maybe not, I wouldn't say forever, but 6 months maybe before you hit a trigger, or you could hit 3 triggers in a quarter, right? And that's kind of where you kind of go back and figure out, okay, we're hitting a lot of triggers, or we're not hitting enough triggers. How do we have to adjust things moving forward? But then obviously after the trigger event happens, then you begin to execute. All right, next step. Look for potential business impact. So if you don't have something in place, what has been the impact? Start to socialize and collaborate. So kind of put the idea into the head, right? This is not a bad thing. Maybe many times your organization is already struggling with it and hasn't really put the finger on what needs to be done. And this is not, this isn't a competitive role, and this isn't like a marketing role. It's a competitive marketing role, right? Organize your processes to lend credibility to a full-scale program. So again, you might already be doing some of this. Maybe putting into a more structured and approach, you can do it even faster, right? And research, vendors and analyst firms. So there are firms and vendors that can help you build this plan, right? They do workshops. I'm not going to name any on this, but if you want to reach out to me personally, I can kind of talk this through with you. That'd be fine. And ultimately build the plan. And remember, and this is one of my favorite sayings, and especially we get caught up in this in marketing, perfection can be the enemy of good. Speed the market is the name of the game here.
Yeah, I think getting something down is definitely the most important part of this. Get started, get the definition in there, and understand the players and get going on it.
Yep. And that's key, right? We can always overthink things. We always do.
Yes.
I just threw out the poll. The next one is, how's this discussion changed your viewpoint on market response? So do you see some value in developing a plan immediately? Ooh, I already see people ringing in on that one. So I love it. Looks like we could benefit, but I need more information. We already have a plan, but this gives me more to think about. Market response plan just won't work in my organization. So I'll give you a couple more seconds here to ring in. And I think people are ready to see the value of this immediately. So thank you for your input. And great. So up next, we have a webinar that we're coming to you at the end of September. And this is kind of well, actually, Lisa, I'll let you talk a little more about
Yeah,
this.
it's at at the 2019 Competitive Marketing Summit that we held outside of Denver. One of the things that was just fantastic was the number of women in competitive marketing, not just competitive research, but in the comms and product marketing, who came together and really shared our experiences. And so we wanted to talk to a couple of these women and talk to them, have them speak to the market about what are their experiences using competitive marketing, and as opposed to CI specifically, but how do you use that in the organization, and how has that impacted your career? So this is women. I'll be hosting this. Ben will be on as well. But we really wanted to start sharing some of the goodness that happened from that conference,
Yeah.
and help to share the information. And it's certainly helpful to our male colleagues as well. We had really just a great community building event, and so we want to promote this a little bit more.
I thought it was awesome. Yeah, very impressive. All right. And so actually, we do have some questions that came up. One is, could regulatory announcements, regulatory implementations become a trigger? Yeah, I'll throw that one to you, Lisa.
Yes. So in the highly regulated verticals, we see the software vendors or the tech vendors that deal specifically with verticals see this quite often. That now that there's a different requirement, that maybe you need a different kind of security or a different kind of approach when you're dealing with financial or energy or education or healthcare, and that those regulatory events can definitely create a competitive trigger event or compelling event that you do need to respond to, either to reassure customers or to have a plan going forward, work with the product team on making sure that you're partnering, make a build buy decision, or build buy partner decision on how you're going to respond to that regulatory environment.
Great. And the second question I saw come up, which is one I've been anticipating this whole webinar, is will there be an in-person conference anytime soon? Yes. So we want to have this very badly. We're looking to do something perhaps early 2022, maybe late winter, early spring. So details, we're still exploring and researching details on that, but we'll try to get it somewhere in the center of the country, so it'll be easy for people to access from both coasts. So Colorado's still in contention, but looking at some other cities as well, that might be good that time of year. So I want to thank you for joining. I want to thank Lisa for being my co-presenter today. And I want to thank Rena for being our marketing communicator and social media expert on these webcast summits. So thank you, everyone. And thank you.
Great to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.